In our study of the Gospel of Matthew, we now are arriving at Matthew chapter 5 and verse 5. Once again, we will read first from the King James Version, which says this: Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And then I will turn to a more modern English translation, which says this, the Good News Bible: Happy are those who are humble. They will receive what God has promised. If you were to create a one-day business leadership seminar, you would probably not have the headline speaker speak on being meek. The idea of meek is not consistent with secular views of leadership. We expect leaders to be driven. We allow leaders to have a bit of moxie. We have come to expect leaders to have an inflated sense of self. In fact, from my experience, many of these qualities are admired when they are found among those in leadership positions in evangelical churches. A large church in any denomination is probably not going to do a leadership search based on the idea that we need a church leader who is going to be meek. To be meek is not considered a positive thing in our world. The Sermon on the Mount as a whole, which is found in Matthew chapter 5 through chapter 7, has been seen historically as a catalog of the ideal behavior that is out there but never attained by Christians. In this sense, a verse like this is seen as presenting something that is the ideal and not the real. The church has always, through its history, had to guard against the creation of two tiers of Christian living. One tier is for the really super saints, and one for the Joe Average saints. The really spiritual live this way, and the majority of Christians do not. It is really important to understand that there's only one standard to Christian life and living, and it applies to all in the church. So a beatitude that stresses the importance of being meek is for all in the church who call Jesus Lord and Savior. The word meek in some English translations of this verse, we find used the word humble. This is probably a word most of us have some sense of its meaning versus the word meek. When we strive to be meek or humble, we are getting at what it means to be a Christian. To be a Christian involves acknowledging your sin to God and casting yourself at the feet of Jesus and of his mercy. To be a Christian involves acknowledging that we are dependent on God and dependent on the work of Jesus to make us able to stand before God. You see, if you have made the movement of faith, how in the world can you have an inflated sense of self? You see, to be meek is to live in the shadow of the cross. To be meek is to internalize the truth that I'm nothing apart from him. If you have been in the church long enough or have worked in the church long enough, you know that some church leaders lack meekness. Now, I'm not talking about just pastors. I'm saying leaders of all sorts, lay or clerical. In fact, I like this quotation from the early second century church document known as a Didache, or sometimes called the Teaching of the 12 Apostles. In the Didache, we find these words: Appoint for yourself, therefore, bishops and deacons worthy of the Lord, men who are meek and do not love money, and who are true and approved. Now, the key is that the word meek used in that verse there is the same as used in our Matthew chapter 5, verse 5. Notice that one of the key requirements for ministerial office is to be meek. Now, think about this for a moment. The fact that it had to be said here early in the second century tells us what? Not everybody got that directive from Jesus. There were church leaders out there with an inflated sense of who and what they are. Church leaders can go from doing an important job to feeling self importance because of the job they do. And then, of course, in the work of ministry, there's always those, and I think even a person like me at times is guilty of this, that we can think all others have got the job of ministry wrong. Christian leaders and Christians in general must be people who live lives of meekness, people who seek to be humble. So, who is more important, us or Jesus? To live in meekness is to acknowledge that Jesus is more important.